But welcome everybody to another episode of the Phil Simon Clinic Tanzania Project Speaker Series. We are delighted to have the guest that we have tonight, Jamil Husain, and I'll tell you a little bit about him in just a few minutes. I wanted to show some of our upcoming talks through the end of the year. In next month, we're going to have Dr. Ezekiel Noah Moirana. He's one of our now graduated scholars who is an accomplished physician in Tanzania, and he works in the Ministry of Neglected Diseases. So it's sort of like the Ministry of Discarded Toys, for those of you that remember the old Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer cartoon, but very interesting area of things like, well, not so neglected, like malaria and worm infections and so forth. And he's going to be coming live from Tanzania, so that will be exciting. In July, we have Dr. Liam Frink, who will be discussing some of the issues facing indigenous peoples of polar regions. He has a National Science Foundation grant as an anthropologist, and I think it's going to be a fascinating talk. In August, we're going to be dark. We'll take a vacation. September, we return with Dr. John Tegzies, who's the acting dean of the Western School of Veterinary Medicine. He is going to present a talk on snake venom. He's done extensive research in this. Snake bites continue to be a challenge for people that live in underserved countries, and especially rural areas, even in our own country. And so he's going to discuss that. He is a veterinarian. October 11th will be Dr. Aaron Berkowitz, who's a clinical neurologist at San Francisco General Hospital and also the VA hospital in San Francisco. He used to be at Harvard. He spent a great deal of time with Partners in Health in Haiti, and now has a book that's just out called One by One by One. So he'll be discussing his work with Paul Farmer, among others, in Haiti. November, we'll take a little break because of the holidays. December, we'll finish up our year with an update on meeting the scholars and see what they're doing and what they've done through the academic year. 2024 should be a very good year as well. We've got some interesting talks, one from leadership in the African Wildlife Foundation. We're going to have one of the primatologists who's still working in Gombe with Jane from the Jane Goodall Institute. Pasadena Public Health will appear with Dr. Matthew Feaster, who's an epidemiologist, really a wonderful speaker, and he will discuss the issues of infectious disease pandemics on environments. Dr. Lori Morgan has graciously agreed to do a talk for us she's the CEO of Huntington Hospital. And in February, we are going to attempt a live from Tanzania talk with Team Tanzania 2024. This will be our first trip back since 2018. And if we have decent Wi-Fi, we will do a speaker series from Tanzania and give you an update on our live activities when we're over there. So really some interesting things. If any of you have speakers that you think would be good for our speaker series, please email them to me. You can reach me at kschreiner1@msn.com, or you can reach out to Ariel Herbert, our admin assistant, and she can forward that information to me. We're just really enjoying this series. I hope you are as well, because we have a wide variety of people that have interesting perspectives on global health and the hardships that all of us go through when we have when we live in an underserved country. Let me just set the background a little bit for tonight for Jamil's discussion about currently, as we speak, 43% of people on the continent of Africa do not have electricity. That means there's about 600 million people that do not have access to any kind of electrically run light bulbs or anything else. 900 million people in the continent of Africa still use charcoal and wood fires to cook and heat. And that, of course, has significant impacts on the environment. For those of you who've heard us present some of our projects from Tanzania, one of the things we bring are plastic surgeons, because so many children have suffered severe burns when they fall into these charcoal cooking braziers. And so there really is a need for developing infrastructure and novel projects, engineering projects, power projects, climate friendly ingenuities for these countries so they really can come out of these very severe deprivations and move forward, but in a clean, healthy, and productive sort of way. There was a call to really boost research on the continent of Africa from the distinguished journal Nature. And I think that that is something that we really want to encourage among our scholars and certainly among our partners in Tanzania. Africa certainly needs funding for research. And they need to learn the tools of doing effective research for developing technological advancements, especially in things like engineering and essentials for a good quality life. So to that point, our speaker tonight is Jamil Husain, who I have known now for about 2.5 years, 3 years, I guess. He is a passionate software engineer and electrical engineer, but he's also a very creative innovator, and he is deeply, deeply committed to the underserved. He grew up in Sri Lanka and Pakistan, or excuse me, in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and has a keen interest in really reaching out to very underserved communities to bring new technologies, innovative technologies that can enhance their quality of life. He has done some work in the past with the Rohingya refugees on the borders of Burma and Myanmar. He has brought that talent back to the United States, where he has done impactful projects with both NASA and the Department of Defense, but more pertinent to what he's going to discuss tonight, to developing innovative perspectives and projects in underserved countries with his engineering skills. I met Jamil a couple of years ago when he reached out to me to help him further along a project which I find fascinating and I think has tremendous application, looking at breath samples as a diagnostic modality, first with COVID, but it certainly has a lot of possibilities to extend to many other diseases, including tuberculosis, cancer, other respiratory diseases, and even other kinds of conditions like heart disease. Turns out that your breath really is a very important thing to measure and contains all kinds of information about what's going on inside your body. And Jamil has developed a wonderful device that I believe he's going to talk about a little bit tonight, called the Clear Breath Portable Breathalyzer. But it's a good example of innovative, outside the box kind of thinking that and bringing forth a project that can really make a difference in so many people's lives in terms of healthcare, but also just in terms of the quality of their life. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamil, and I'm just really delighted to welcome him, and thank you for doing this tonight. Jamil Husain.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's a real honor to be part of this forum, and thank you for the invitation to participate. Yeah, I've always had an interest in developing technologies that can make an impact. As an engineer, you're always thinking about what sort of the creative instincts sometimes take over, to even sometimes solving problems that may not be there. But in the case of the when the pandemic happened a few years ago, it really drove me to think about ideas and how we could quickly figure out ways to find folks that have been injected with this disease. And it was to me it was surprising to me that in all the innovation that we haven't developed rapid techniques to deploy technology in places where underserved communities don't have quick access to healthcare or doctors even. And so I started thinking about, what are tools that we can bring about that are low cost, very effective, easily accessible to those communities. And by easy access, I don't mean transporting it over there. I mean, and cost. Obviously, cost becomes an issue. So over the last few years, before the pandemic, we looked at a number of different ideas. I live in the U.S. in Virginia, and I was brought up here. So I worked as an engineer at NASA, where we're mostly focused on missions to study phenomena outside our world, and we do study phenomena within the terrestrial world as well. We do plenty of Landsat missions. You've probably heard of that, which talk about the topology and the climate changes in our world. But sometimes when you visit a village in a border town between Burma and Bangladesh, and you see such abject poverty, and you see, you realize if you come from a country in the U.S. where you take everything for granted. For example, drinking water. We don't think twice about. Well, sometimes we do. We want to use a Brita filter sometimes, but ordinarily you wouldn't worry too much about drinking from the faucet here. But in other countries, particularly not in countries like Bangladesh, where I spent part of my childhood, you probably do not want to drink from the faucet. But when you get to the village areas where the subsistence economy is, where very low levels of poverty, access to healthcare, I mean, it's really access to food and water, the very, very basic needs, and shelter. So on one of my trips about 10 years ago, there's a group called the Rohingyas. They're a indigenous group that belong to the eastern side of Burma and the border of Bangladesh. The Burmese autocratic military government of Burma basically disowns these people. There are about 1.5 million of them, and they tend to every few years push them out into the borders of Bangladesh. And the Bangladeshi government does not want them either. So they're kind of a large refugee group without a country. So happening one day to visit up in those hills, and seeing that they were drinking water from these tube wells. And I talked to some of the health officers there, and they were saying, oh, there's people, they get, after 10, 15 years, these same people who have lived here, they die and they get these lesions. And I'd read about it, that it's arsenic is a really huge problem in that part of the world. I mean, believe it or not, we have arsenic issues here in the West Coast as well, in Arizona and all as well. But we don't have to. We're such a civilized infrastructure here. We're not worried about it as much. We have plenty of potable water sources for here. So we started thinking about it. There's no electricity, as Kim pointed out, in a lot of these underserved communities in the world, in Africa or in Bangladesh. So what can you build, and that can be effectively remove arsenic? I mean, there's so many problems to solve, but when you're there, you try to think of what's something I could potentially do to solve. I can't bring them food. I can't change the political structure, or I'm not a politician. But as an engineer, you start to think about it. Maybe we can come up with something, collaborate with the UN or something. And so we worked with some folks, and we had an idea, and we came up with a filtration device for arsenic that seemed to do well in the lab, and we presented it to a few places. And I think I've got a slide here. Maybe I can bring that up. Did that come up okay? Okay, great. So you can see those tube wells there, and that's a picture from, and I asked permission from these folks. When you go to these countries, and Kim talks about Tanzania, and I've been back to Bangladesh and other countries like that. You spend a bit of time there, you get to see it's normal life for them to drink this water, and we tested the water, and it had very high levels of arsenic at the time. The arsenic levels are the max for the EPA standard in this country is about 10 ppb, parts per billion, and there it tested at about 200 ppb, much higher. And but the authorities are not really too concerned about it, because they just consider it water. So here is an issue. We thought about it. It takes a long time for, when I say long, about 5 to 10 years before the symptoms manifest themselves in these lesions, and then and other cancer maladies that affect you, and then folks die. And there isn't exactly effective medical care, so they don't get treatment in time either. So what was the idea was, in societies where there are a lot of infrastructure, you can buy powered filters or more sophisticated devices that you pay money for, and you can filter out arsenic. You don't worry about it. But in these kinds of infrastructure where there isn't much other than these 2 wells for water, and this is where we need to be creative and find ways. So one of the communities that I list here as a target was the Rohingya refugees, because they don't really get support from neither government, and they're by themselves in long swaths of land with not much but bales of hay to structure for their housing. So there was an identification of a problem. As an engineer, you always see, what can I do? Sometimes you can't do a thing, but then here's something we thought about. So here's an approach that we took. You can see that it looks like a couple of dishes cascading on top of each other. It's a very simple device, and it has a high flow rate. Well, not high, 2 to 5 minutes from top to bottom. It's a flow, but we tested the end product, and we were getting a significant amount of ppb or arsenic removed for every gallon. We also wanted to make sure there wasn't any bacterial buildup, and we wanted to also have materials that could be replaced easily by the user, because to really promote a technology in a community like that, it could just easily get discarded, or they lose interest, or they'll say, yeah, I don't want to wait for the water to come, I'll just drink from here. So it needs to be a very low maintenance thing, and it needs to have the ability to work without power. And the time we built this, there weren't any filtration devices for arsenic that we knew of that didn't require a powered filtration substrate. So ours was the only one that had the results. We did run into the political problems, because one of the scientists who I was working with was from a different country. It was not, they were at odds with this country, Bangladesh, so they would not allow us to disseminate these filters unless they were manufactured here. Well, the country that this scientist was working with me from, her country wouldn't allow her to. So we still had that problem. We weren't able to actually disseminate these devices. We built these prototypes and we're not able to. So it's frustrating that when you take a humanitarian approach to solving a problem that can be solved by engineering and a very simple construct, it's the social and political barriers that somehow stop us from helping human beings. So that's an example of a technology that, as an engineer, you want to do when you see communities that you can try and impact. So I just wanted to give that as an approach. I mean, there's many things that I've been involved in. I was involved in a organization called the Grameen. I won't say I was involved. My father was part of this Grameen Bank organization, and that inspired me to think about what could we do as technologists or engineers to promote better welfare for these communities.
If I can ask a question, then Jamil, sure. In terms of sure. With your experience with I mean, it's a wonderful, simple little seems like and quite effective sort of design with local. I think it's such an important thing to remember, with sort of local materials that they can easily gather. How, if you'd been able to move forward on this, and sort of sounds like the political problems with team members got to be the sort of obstruction there, but if you were able to move forward, how did the locals accept this? Was that something that you thought that they would be able to see the effects? We know that WHO recognizes arsenic as a significant health problem, and especially in underserved countries, it can of course cause acute poisoning, but also has long-term side effects with cardiovascular disease and malformations of fetuses and so forth. So it's a really significant issue. Sometimes there's always that sort of challenge of getting the locals not to be suspicious and to accept the technology, or to take part in producing it. What was your experience with that with the Rohingya people?
Well, the Rohingyas are extremely receptive. The issue is with the and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but the folks around the organizations that manage the social help organizations, not necessarily the UNFCFG, but the local governments there, they are very suspicious. They, as a matter of fact, one of the first times I was there, they interviewed me and kept me in a room for about 4.5 hours, asking me a lot of questions about where in the US I was from and who I was representing, and was I recording this information? And I kept trying to convince them that I had no such interest. I was just there to observe and see if there's anything that I could do. But at the end, they did let me out, and I got to see some things, and then I got to see some of the Rohingya folks. It is an issue that's become personal to me. The plight of the Rohingyas. As a youngster, my father negotiated the repatriation of about 350,000 Rohingyas in the early 80s, when he was in charge of negotiations between Bangladesh and Burma. And I remember that in the country, that was a big event, and it required the U.S. and 3 countries to push the Rohingyas back to their country. But the fact is, there are refugees all over the world, and some of them don't have the kind of infrastructure support that you would if you were a refugee in Europe, for example. But if you're a refugee in these countries or in Africa, it's hard. And so building solutions that are quickly accessible. The folks on the ground, the people were very accepting of this. If you notice, the structure looks like one of their pots. It almost fits in homogeneously into the environment. So we did that on purpose. We didn't want it to look out of place. But I told them that you can't cook on this. You have to. This is only for one particular purpose, and that they needed to change the substrate filter. So we did a prototype for a few families, but there was a lot of suspicion. So unless you get the support of the governments and the powers that be, it's difficult to deliver technology in some of these communities, to be honest, and discouraging at times too.
Did you have did you have to approach sort of the elders and the sort of leaders of the actual villages at any point and have any interaction with them, or
Yes, we did have a meeting or two with some of the leaders to explain what this was, and to explain to them how it be used and how and why it was important. And we had a couple of community meetings, but it was infiltrated by officials from different government organizations who were always suspicious. So the problem is, because I wasn't living in the country, I was considered an American citizen who is bringing a technology, working with other groups. Now, there are a lot of foreign groups that do work there, but I had not been living there for years. I had just come there, and we were there for only a few days or a week or two. So it's difficult. You need to stay there to build trust with the community. And that's one of the things that I did learn. You need to go back over and over again to build that trust. So these folks were accepting of it, but the folks that in the government organizations that support them with food and shelter and all, they're the ones. They also need to have a buy-in to any new technologies that infused into this environment.
One of our audience members asked about how long this filtration system would work before it got plugged up and you had to redo it.
We needed to have them change the substrate filtration parameters every 3 months or so, but it had a life cycle of about a year before it would need to have a more fundamental replacement on some of the bottom layers.
And what was the reactant material? Was that something unique that you had to use, or?
Yeah, it was a couple of different metalloids that we had built up, done some testing on at the George Mason University here, and also with the scientists that we work with. It was a sort of a fibrous material that we wanted to, and we built an insert for it so it could be taken out easier by the folks. It was IP'd as well at the time, and I'm hesitant to go back to it because of the scientists who held part of the IP and the issues that she might face from her country. So,
Yeah, IP, intellectual property, right?
right, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. And then, how much did it cost to put something like that? I can't imagine it would be terribly expensive, but just so in real time, how much would it cost?
I mean, we were gonna. This is going to be sold for about $5. I know it's hard, but we were going to build this in scale, and we were getting it subsidized, and so we were going to sell this for each family was going to spend around $5. So keep in mind that if you're a refugee, the income level is next to was about 30 taka. Was about 30. Yeah, it was about 30 taka. It was about $3 or $4 a month. It wasn't so $5 is a lot. So we were initially going to subsidize these to the Rohingya community, but we felt that for more communities that had more infrastructure and had opportunities and they're above this poverty level, but we're also drinking arsenic water in these neighboring communities, it would sell for about $5 or $6. The time came.
Really fascinating. And again, just speaks to innovative, inexpensive, and locally supplied projects can sometimes still be held up because of socio-political complexities and that kind of stuff. So I think you can see the challenges aren't even just on the ground when you're working in countries that are very resource poor. And so acceptance also is such an important part of the locals to adopt different kinds of technologies that they're not used to. One of our audience members asked, does it remove only arsenic, or are there other contaminants that it can filter out?
There were other contaminants that it also filtered out at about a 90 to 95% level. Bacteria and other contaminants were also removed, and other metalloids. I can't remember all of them. It's been about 12 years, but it was. I have some good specs on it, and I'm happy to share it with anybody that's more interested as well. And I would love for this to be deployed in one day as well. And we had imagined a smaller form factor device as well. It's there are a lot of programs, a lot of projects, and there's only so much time. But this is an important one for us to try and make happen at some point in the future.
And with this, a lot of the in Tanzania, there's often a local well, and I know that certainly happens all over the world. Is this something that you would present that would be present at a public drinking source, or would it be something that would be best used? They bring the water to their home and then do it there.
Yeah, and these have these things called kolshis in this community, which are these little containers. You sometimes see a man or woman put it on their head and they walk around. If you've seen that in the community, so they would bring the water, they would load that up from a well, and then we wanted these to be in the homes, so one per family, and the average family unit is a very large unit. The average unit was about 6 to 8 people, man, woman, and kids. So we wanted our goal was not to have this, but we could have built a model for this for public consumption as well. And we thought about other ways, but we just wanted to build this for home use for the time. But the technology could have been adapted for, a public utility use as well, next to a well.
Really fascinating. And of course, it doesn't require any electricity, so that's great.
Right,
just gravity, which we have plenty of that. So.
Right. We looked into other projects as well. For example, in some of these countries, we were talking about drone applications are the last few years have been very advanced. Well, nowadays you hear about attack drones and defense drones in the wars, you hear about them. But when we were imagining about also 7-8 years ago, we were building drone applications to do what they call multispectral analysis of mapping of lands to see which are some more fertile areas, which are more needed more water, which needed more care. So that was a project that I wish we had been able to continue, but it's without a lot more funding and support and having to actually stay in the community. It's difficult to deploy these technologies, but I think drones are being used for a lot of different applications now. Non-warlike applications. That is what I was talking to. So there's a lot of applicability for supporting underserved communities in drone apps. Obviously, transportation of medicine, vital supplies can be done there, from a hospital clinic to a village, and also through the use of AI technologies, you're able to build more intelligent deliveries for a drone application, because it would know how to navigate and get and go exactly where it needs to go. And as you know, Amazon can do deliveries with the advent of how advanced we've become with this. So that's an area that has promise in some areas as well. But of course, as Kim and I, when we first met, we were thinking to build a small device that could detect COVID and do it quickly. We about 2.5 years ago, when I approached Kim, one of the conditions she gave me for maybe helping us out and providing her valuable info was, well, when I go to Tanzania one of these times, I need to be able to have one or two of these devices with me. And I said, well, you'll be the only one, but you'll have them. So that was my promise to her. So we started a venture with NASA when at the advent of the pandemic, and I'm segueing into that technology now, Kim. The idea was we were looking to see. We understood that breath had been known for about 30 years as a very potentially viable sampling modality for diagnostics. The question was, why hadn't we built it already? We've done plenty of work in the labs. Different labs have done great studies. The problem is, it's one thing to build something in a lab when you have all the power and the material and you're not worried about the size. It's very different when you're trying to miniaturize that technology so you can actually deploy it into the real world. So that was one of our challenges. How do we build something that can sense for the disease state of COVID through the methodology we chose? So we teamed up with NASA, and they had a technology for sensing different reactive modalities from a reaction from aerosols. And your breath is really a combination of exogenous and exogenous VOCs. Some produced from within and some from the outside. Thousands of potential VOCs. So we decided we were not going to look for specific elements. We're not going to look for ammonia or an H3 or something. We knew that there were about a dozen or so from a bunch of studies that were being done. One of them was in Wuhan and other places that talked about what the characteristics of VOCs would be for COVID.
Volatile organic compounds, just for clarification.
All right.
For the non-organic chemists in the crowd.
So I'm not a chemistry guy or anything like that, but I just feel like if you want to build something and you can collaborate with people who are in the chemistry side or the physics side, or that's what it should be about. As an engineer, you need to be open to the ideas for designing a solution. So we work with we put a really good team together. We got help from NASA, and we were able to about 7-8 months ago develop a nano sensor, which is a sensor. If you can see this, it's about this big, that had maybe tens and tens of mini sensors or I'll just call them mini sensors, that had different materials on them that had multivariate reactions to your aerosols in your breath. So why does that matter? Because with the advent of algorithms and AI-based algorithms, we were able to look at the patterning from somebody who has COVID and make a determination that, yeah, this person has it. So we did a clinical study, short study, and our results were actually much better than we expected them to be. We didn't expect it to be this good. But here's the thing about AI and data. You hear this often. The more data you get, the better and more effective it gets, right? So the general AI concept, it was pretty powerful to see that we could get results that were nearly on par with the best PCR test results from Roche, which are, I don't know, 90. Roche Cobas is 95% and 93%, and we were 91% and 94% or something along those lines for specificity and sensitivity. So it took us a while to do that. And what was important for our goals in building a technology like that is we wanted to make it small. And that's been one of the challenges. And that's always why we sometimes get results in a lab that show promise and then you never hear about it for years to come. And why does it take so long? Because it is difficult to deploy something into the market or commercialize something and put it into the market that's tested well in the lab, because you need to miniaturize it, you need to have a supply chain, you need to have funding, you need to have infrastructure and support, and you need to have the will and the courage to move forward with it. And so all of which can sometimes be overwhelming. But we're happy to say we did build it, and we're now in the process of, I think on the next slide, can you all see that? So that's a functioning prototype of the device. It's a mouthpiece. It's a custom mouthpiece that only allows aerosols to go one way. So you can only breathe in it. It will not let you ingest any air from the device. And you can hold it in one hand, and there's an app that connects to it, and simply within about we've tested for generally within under 60 seconds, you get a result. We started with COVID. We're now looking at TB and flu A, B, RSV, diabetes, ketosis, and there are other possibilities. About a year ago, one of our competitors in Europe, they call Brethonomics, I think they built a slightly different technology. It had a few challenges along the way, but he told me that their technology was a bit too big, and he had a daughter that had seizures from time to time, and he had heard that the onset of seizures, sometimes your breath chemistry changes. So he said, I'd be intrigued to see if your device can one day, predict breath through breath biopsy, predict whether or not you're about to have a seizure. I mean, these are exciting possibilities and potential. It's yet to we need to know if they can be realized one day.
Yes, it's just a fascinating thing. Just just to kind of give you some context, is the idea of that your breath can indicate what's going on inside of you, and can be detected by something or someone else, has been well demonstrated by the ability of dogs, for example, to sniff out people who have COVID, or dogs who are able to recognize when their owners are about to have a seizure, as Jamil just said. And part of that is this change in the volatile organic compounds, the chemistry of their breath. And in light of the fact that Elizabeth Holmes just was trotted off to a prison yesterday for her Theranos black box, I want to reassure you that what Jamil is describing is a very legitimate and well-tested technology that's actually already out there, but it's in kind of big, bulky formats. And I don't believe that they have the same highly sensitive type sensors that Jamil is working with now. So, you do want to have good science behind products that you advertise, and not just a fancy looking marketing thing and wear black turtlenecks to sell stuff. But I'm excited about this technology, and there's quite a bit of literature on it, including, I noticed that Dr. Dichter's on tonight. One of the big challenges in hospitals is Clostridium difficile, which is a bacteria that causes horrendous diarrhea in patients and is recognized as a hospital-acquired infection. And there are some emerging data now that the VOC pattern for C. difficile would be something that could be targeted to screen for patients easily when they come into the hospital. So the applicability of this device in the United States is huge. And you can imagine, going to the Dodgers or going to the opera or something where somebody stands there with a clear breath device and just, takes breath samples to make sure everybody's feeling well and they don't have some infection that they're going to spread all over the place. It has enormous applicability, but there is good science behind it. It is, albeit a little bit early, but like I said, animals are quite good at detecting these VOCs. The other animal that's very good at detecting VOCs are honeybees. So this was my idea of envisioning a screening at airports for people with COVID before they got on an airplane, as they go into a box filled with honeybees. And if the bees go crazy, it's a signal that you've got COVID. I don't think that wouldn't be as popular as Jamil's clear breath device, but its applicability here is great. And if you can think about doing this in countries where there's no electricity, several of the physicians that are on tonight know very well that Kizongo Clinic, where we work, has no running water, no electricity. And so our diagnostic capabilities are really pretty limited. But this kind of device that runs using a cell phone and on batteries would be an enormously important step forward. So that's why I was excited to get involved, and Jamil was very persistent in luring me into this. But it's been a really fascinating and very, very interesting project.
Thank you, Kim. No, it's very rewarding to be part of something like this, and I hope it'll be out there everywhere at some point in the near future. We're going through our paces right now for validation in larger trials, and so that's where we are.
And to that point, Jamil, we've talked about sort of the challenges of getting funding to do projects like this. How receptive are organizations like NASA, which, I can see where this product, I was teasing you about, this would be something that would be used at the space station in Mars. And I didn't really want to set up a clinic in Mars because it takes 2 years to get there. But but it does have a lot of potential for extraterrestrial usage. But how supportive, and where do you go? Where does an engineer who's got a good idea, whether it's something very simple like your arsenic removing water device, or something as sophisticated as this, what organizations can you reach out to, and how receptive are they? Is that WHO? Is it the Fund for TB, tuberculosis, AIDS, and HIV and malaria? Is it, where do you go?
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to folks at the Gates Foundation about 6-7 months ago, and I know that they have a something similar, a much larger device that they're testing for validation on TB in South Africa. And there was a suggestion that once we get to a certain level of validation on our device, that we could perhaps be incorporated into their trials. So we want to be involved in opportunities where this can be included in those trials around the world. We want this device to be something that can serve as a warning beacon. And I always give folks the example when about 2 years ago, when we were talking about the onset of the Omicron variant in South Africa, we were saying, well, the news was all over with the red headlines everywhere that is Omicron. We don't know where it is and when it's coming. But what if you had a device that could pattern recognize this variant, and then you could simply send that algorithm match to thousands of these devices around the world, so you could serve as a beacon to track where it's spreading? I think that would be a help to the CDC for disease spread. And that's another challenge that I saw that we lacked. They were nonlinear number of tests of different types from different states. So you couldn't quite tell, the accuracy of which were different. So it'd be nice to have one platform. It doesn't have to be ours, but something similar that can homogeneously measure efficacy and accuracy of the numbers and stats so that you can better affect delivering care to those sites. If a hospital needs more of this supply and that, then you can know that. But if you had a way of streamlining consistent data from across different places where you're collecting it, as opposed to multiple tests or that have different levels of efficacy, then that would make it easier for health officials to know how to prioritize. And I met with the HHS and I told them that, and they all nodded in agreement, but they didn't do much about it, honestly. So yeah, so as far as where we go, I'm happy to go wherever they want us to go. I just want us to be in large scale trials and get this validation done, so that I would love for this to be in communities where healthcare access is a challenge, where infrastructure is a challenge, and where you can use a device like this and hopefully at least get you the first line of defense with a quick device you carry in your backpack, and each time you run this, you can run so far we've tested maybe about 200 tests per cycle before you have to replace a cartridge in it. It could be more. We haven't validated that yet. So that's what's exciting, the promise of this. And the interesting thing is, because we're using AI developed algorithms, with more and more data, they're just going to get better and more effective, and not threatening, as some AI folks.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm thinking that this is a great modality to, you and I've talked about this, Jamil, of if all of a sudden if you have this international network of data that's coming from devices being deployed around, and in portals of entry and so forth, but then all of a sudden you start seeing patterns of a VOC that isn't recognized by anything, and is that the first sign that there's a new pathogen that
Yes.
now has emerged that's causing trouble? And then I wanted you maybe to speak a little bit. There's such a great fear of AI now. If you could just speak a little bit to what the role of artificial intelligence is, and how it handles big data and what it can do that really enhances healthcare and global health.
Yeah, that's great. That's the revolution of the day, I guess. AI. It's so we used to talk about 20 years ago the word data analytics, and you'd look at large swaths of data and it's called data analytics. But at that time, there were humans looking at this data and making decisions. AI is basically looking at this large swaths of data and basically informing that non-human entity through a computer algorithm that, here's your decision points based on these patterns. And that's called artificial intelligence. And there's different types of artificial intelligence. There's the stuff that you hear all over, CNN and all that. The fear of there's my son, my 8th grader son, who's gleefully telling his friends that, hey, let's not go on ChatGPT and write that, find that equation result, and because it can kind of do it, which I told my son, yeah, it can, but it's not being validated. So you don't know if it's actually right. So I wouldn't go there, and you definitely don't want to do this in this household. So it's that part of AI is remarkable, and it's because they've got a highly powered computer algorithm that it can run a zillion row queries quickly, find data, and it's been programmed to analyze it and to give you constructs. Whether it's right or wrong, there's nobody really validating it. We're at the early stages of this. AI in healthcare is the only real what I would call the most efficacy in AI is in healthcare. We're studying the advent of there are cancer lesions on skin by using AI algorithms right now. There are companies writing apps night and day There are skin apps being developed to look at your skin that you can do first. So, we used, we do breath, but there's a visual cued AI that is doing analysis to a decent level of accuracy for many things. And so I feel like in healthcare, AI has shown great promise. It's not to solve the problem, it's to enable the physicians to do their job even more effectively. I think that's where AI has shown good promise. We are fearful because AI, if it is very easy to build an AI engine that could simply step from one platform to the other and possibly shut down a power plant one day, thinking that that's within its mission. I know the iRobot and the Terminator syndrome has been talked about. And unfortunately, it's not too far from reality if somebody really wants to go there. A lot of motor functions can be that you can build into a robot can be controlled through a very smart AI, deep learning AI that learns as it goes. Just like the human brain continues to learn billions and billions of bytes of information every day, so are these AI algorithms. The reason we have all this computing power has now allowed us an inanimate AI object to become this powerful because of all the computing power we have. Companies like NVIDIA and others have no fault of their own. NVIDIA was building, this is a company that builds, should I call it, microprocessors for video games. Sounds really innocent because they accelerated how video games work, but a side product of that was that the acceleration of CPU computing power allowed things like allowed AI to be accelerated in its form. And so I think in healthcare, we have some very good applicability in AI. And I would consider ClearBet to be an AI application that is on the right side of history.
That's encouraging. And I think, I sort of was making a disparaging joke about the Theranos people, but the idea of bringing simple devices and accessible devices to people in their homes or in remote areas or displaced people, and being able to transport these pieces of equipment safely and that they still retain their accuracy in diagnosing diseases is a noble one. And I think it really is something that can be an enormous asset for the challenges that we face with some of the really significant global health problems that we're dealing with, not the least of which is the emergence of new pathogens, and of course the widespread spread of one in particular that I think has really brought home the importance of being good stewards and also monitoring what's going on in the planet that can really affect healthcare. So I really think that I think in medical school they don't teach us much about the role of engineering, and some physicians go into device manufacturing and device innovations and so forth, but I think it's a really important part of being a healthcare provider is learning how to use equipment, of course, but also knowing and sort of being intrigued by what engineering can do to improve healthcare. And again, this sort of goes back to the idea of One Health, where you have all kinds of professional people, clinicians and researchers and physicians and veterinarians and biologists and ecologists and climatologists and engineers all talking together and sharing ideas and sharing the way they think about things, because their approach may be different, but that may be just what you need when you're an oncologist or when you are an infectious disease specialist, or when you're designing equipment to keep a crew that's on Mars safe for 5 years without access to Huntington Hospital. So
Right.
I think it's just an opportunity of union together rather than and it's unfortunate that the incident that you described with the arsenic thing and how it pulled that politics got in the way of an effective outcome there. But
Right. It does happen. Sometimes you have to trudge through it, and with this, I like technologies like this that are completely non-political. So, and I don't want politics to interfere with what are non-political objectives, which are to help humanity and to improve the welfare of communities that need the additional support. And so I think AI has a role to play in that, and being infused in technologies, particularly in healthcare, which I think would be very beneficial. And that's, to me, the only real place where AI has had very strong footprints of progress. But we're waiting to see what else it'll do.
It's just fascinating. I applaud your dedication throughout your life, Jamil, to the underserved. It sounds like your parents sort of influenced you in that decision, and we certainly need really, innovative and intelligent and compassionate people to help bring better equipment and better ideas, to areas that really wouldn't have access to that.
Well,
So
I'm
thank you for doing
inspired by
that.
people like you, Kim, who are, and I always thank you for coming on board to help us and give us advice, because as an engineer, you just think about a mission to accomplish, the building blocks, and you figure out how to build something. But then sometimes it's a scientist that has to have the vision. Sometimes it's a doctor that has, hey, this is what's important. Sometimes it's just a social worker. So we have to be open to each other, to share each other's ideas, and treat each other equally, as equally important to provide input. And what's important, being an engineer, to just build something because you think somebody will come and buy it or use it. You have to think about what do people want? What is going to benefit people? And then who wants it, and why? Who would it help? And it's difficult to navigate all that through all the political machinations that you have to go through at times. But it's important to be bold and just to be courageous, and just to do it as best you can.
Well, you certainly are both of those things. I know you've had to deal with the FDA. I've had a couple little tastes of that with you, and that's a challenge in and of itself, and certainly with NASA and some of the other bigger agencies. But we really thank you for this presentation. It was fascinating. It's a whole part of medicine that I really didn't know anything about, and it's just been a pleasure working with you on this. And I will hold you to the devices. Maybe not this trip, as it's coming up a little fast, but by 2025. We might even have clear breath analyzers for all the goats that we have to deal with when we're in our clinic. The effect of goat breath on the health and welfare of Tanzanians. So. But I think it's just a fascinating thing. So thank you very much, Jamil. Are there any other questions? Would anybody like to ask any questions on chat? Or Jill says, thank you so much for your compassionate projects and your talk tonight.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you so much.
And really enjoyed learning from you. Thank you. Lots of good accolades here. So good reviews.